So we pull into this village that's going to become our new home, and there were people standing around, there were children playing, there were animals in the courtyard. They also had a life expectancy of about 45 down there. Friday nights turned out to be the kind of the scariest night of the week, because the men would go out and drink the sugarcane whiskey and just get horribly intoxicated, and would take the big machetes to each other, and then they would show up on the doorstep, and then folks would run across the street and get me. And most of the time we had suture material. A lot of times it was just the thread out of my sewing box, and I don't know, to this day I'm not sure why it worked, but it did, and we'd get people going again. And
so that was a regular thing on Friday nights?
Yeah, pretty much regular thing.
And that's all.
Win Mason, Brazil, 1966 to 68. Community development / education.
Sure. Wilson Mason. I was in Brazil 1966 through 68, northeast part of Brazil, state of Alagoas. Working in the area of community development, vegetable gardening, nutrition, and education.
Fantastic.
My name is Ed Crotty. I was in Brazil from 1966 to 1968, northeast, state of Paraíba. Originally from Boston, still living around Boston, and it was a great time, and I look forward to...
Okay, Maureen Duncan, Marina, in Portuguese. I was in Brazil, 66 to 68, community development, but we did a little bit of just about everything. I was located in a satellite city outside of the new capital, Brasilia. Interesting place to be because everybody there that came, they were new too, from other parts of Brazil. As a matter of fact, there was some Japanese that had come up from the Sao Paulo area and were planting, and many of the people there, I was tall, I was the tallest person in my little town, and so they started calling me the Japonesa. And it's like, oh, well, this is interesting. They kind of associated us together. And I would say probably the most interesting thing that happened while I was there was one day I was on my way back from Brasilia to my little town of Gama, and the government, all the military, came in with their big guns, and they stopped all the buses, all the planes, cars trying to leave Brasilia. Brazil was a dictatorship at that point, and the dictator did not like the way that the senators and the House of Representatives voted, and they were on their way out of town to Rio, so he decided to stop them all and to bring them all back into Congress to vote the way that he wanted them to vote. So had a fabulous time in Brazil, and it goes on and on. I go back a lot, and I've had a Rotary Foundation trip to the Amazon since then because of my Peace Corps experiences, and got to teach in the middle of the Amazon at a university.
My name is Evelyn Bakken. I was in Brazil, Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, from 1967 to 1969. Now, Salvador, Bahia, Brazil is a beautiful old colonial city where the original Portuguese came to settle Brazil. It was hardly a hardship post. It was weather like San Diego year-round. The people were friendly, always wanted to get to know you, would say hello every day, como vai, como vai. And at first I was in a very modern children's hospital. And my whole thing is I wanted to leave something behind. I didn't want to just staff this hospital. And of course, because my Portuguese skills originally weren't very good, it took me about 6 months to even figure out what was always going on in the hospital. But the director of the hospital had been to Europe one time, and I would talk to him about how I wanted to set up some education classes for the mothers with these children that lived in such poverty. And the director would just want to talk about Europe and America, and didn't seem very interested in this project of getting the mothers educated. I mean, he was a compassionate man, but I found this a lot in the culture. The people that you would talk to, they're more interested in like, oh, just talking to the American. And I'm like, well, let's get something done. And what I learned in Brazil is they did not have our, at least in this part of Brazil, Sao Paulo I think is different. There's work ethic of, oh, do, get to your meetings on time. Sometimes nobody would show up at the meeting that, okay, that I was invited to. But what I learned from them is they had a lot of time for each other, and they cared about each other, but they showed it in a different way. Rather than doing, it was just like hanging out, being with each other, talking, taking time. It was a much slower pace. And I found a lot of value in that too. So what I feel one of my biggest contributions is them to see an American that really loved them, that wasn't all about what they could get, because they were suspicious of Americans. They thought we were imperialistic. They didn't quite trust us. They think we go around the world and want to take other people's resources, which sometimes we do. So can't entirely blame them for that. So this was my experience. And then later I was in a very poor county hospital where they'd have just tin plates. And I know everybody was very impressed with me one time because there was a disease there called Chagas disease that you get through a parasite that eventually goes to the heart, can cause heart failure, and one of those tropical things. And a young man had that disease, and he had a cardiac arrest. And I gave him artificial respiration and mouth to mouth, and all the staff was like, aren't you afraid of getting this horrible disease? Well, of course, I had the medical knowledge that that's not how it's transmitted. And actually, the life cycle of that was rather complex. But, so yeah, I was kind of like looked on as like this brave American young person. But that place, too, was interesting because it was run by nuns, and it was, they had some archaic practices with their medications, whatever, and trying to make a dent in how changing things. I often found that was extremely challenging. But Brazil was a wonderful country. I almost stayed there and didn't come home, but I wanted to earn money and tour Europe, and I know I wouldn't make enough money there. So Brazil was a wonderful experience, and I did end up marrying a Brazilian. So I highly recommended Peace Corps to people, and I'm hoping that my grandchildren will be interested in it.
Conrad from Bismarck, North Dakota. I got my graduate degree in marketing, so I was assigned in the Peace Corps to Brazil in the Amazon region in Maracanã and Belém, and we worked with agricultural cooperatives to help them in their marketing of their product, whether it was agricultural or fishing. They knew that they had to have a cooperative, but they did not know how to use a cooperative, that they had to buy from the cooperative as well as sell to it in order to make it survive.
And what years were you there?
I was there from 1967 to 1970, and after 1970 I went and worked in a training group for the follow-up organization that went back to Belém and to Maracanã in the marketing area. So that was a little over 3 years in all, and have since then been very active in helping to form retired Peace Corps volunteer organizations in North Dakota. We've met several times around the state to share our experiences and to relive them, as it were, and that's where we're from. Well, in one of the cities we worked in the cooperative, people were illiterate and they did not know how to write nor read numbers. And so they would have in the cooperative books, somebody bought, first of all, they'd have the date, 1969. Somebody bought a sack of rice for 5 yen. So they put in the 5 rice and 1, how many they got. Then they would total up the total, and it would be 1969 plus 5, so the number that went on this individual's books was 1974. We pointed that out to the board, and shortly we were run out of town. And that's a true story. There was another volunteer with me at that point.
Run out of town because?
Because we were upsetting the plans of the manager and the board of directors that they were sharing all of this extra money as it came in.
My name is Donald Kaz. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Brazil from 1970 to 1972. We were sort of a special group because we worked out of Belém, which is at the mouth of the Amazon. There was a special Peace Corps office there. We did mostly research on rice, and we helped farmers growing on rice. I was put at the experiment station in Belém, and we had volunteers out who I supposedly provided technical support to, but it was various kinds of support. And about my most interesting experience, the whole experience there was just sort of wild because we went a lot of places by boat, and I learned how to pilot a boat through the islands of the mouth of the Amazon, which it's. Actually, I still have contact with some of the people I worked with. We write back and forth of what actually came to visit me in the States only less than a year ago. So I still, maintain contact. So it was a very satisfying experience.
Well, my name is Joe Kane, and I served in Brazil in the Peace Corps, and it was 1972 to 74. And began at a big city. It's called Belo Horizonte, and it's kind of between Rio and the capital, then new capital of Brasilia. And then I moved to the Amazon for the last year and was at the city of Manaus, right on the river. This story is actually before going to Peace Corps, but I was teaching college in about 61 and had students as counselees. And one student came, I remember Ray Cortan, and he said that he wanted to go to the Peace Corps when he finished college. And I said, you got to tell me about the Peace Corps, because I don't know what you're talking about. And so he told me, and I remember thinking, that's for me. So that was, about 11 years earlier. So it took me 11 years, but I caught up with Ray.
My name is Elsa Cruz. I was in Brazil from 1976 to 1978. I was working, I'm a physical therapist, and I was a physical therapist there working with children.
My name is Desiree Wild. I was in the Peace Corps in 1977 through 79 in Lavras, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And I'm an occupational therapist, and I worked in a school system, and I developed a program for severely disabled children.
Well, tell us a little bit about the program.
The program actually, basically what I did is I did sensory integration with disabled children, but because the rehabilitation in Brazil at that time was very limited, I first started out going to families' homes, and I worked with the children in their homes, and then eventually I convinced the parents to allow the children to come to the school system to have services there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.